Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, Elden Ring is not an easy game, at least not on the surface, and Shadow of the Erdtree as a DLC is exactly the same but amplified even further. 9 times out of 10, more so than personal skill though, the thing that can get you fastest through what seems like an impenetrable obstacle of a boss is just changing up your tactic, either just putting some more time into your setup to make yourself a little stronger with what you're already going for, or how to change up your entire playstyle in order to meet a boss's weaknesses and dampen what seem to be their strengths. We've talked about general ways to improve both just defense and offense in pretty much any build that you use in the expansion, but today we're going to take the secondary route here, and specifically we're going to talk about 3 builds that absolutely, completely, and comfortably consistently destroy the final boss of the DLC in as few attempts as possible, which of course means that it will destroy every boss in the DLC and the main game, as it is by far the hardest one. Essentially, this is for giving you an option for things that you may want to try to get some of your frustrations out on this big guy, or any of the other more challenging DLC enemies. Or just, if you'd want to sit back and watch how easy the fight can be with these things if you go all out into countering these bosses. And of course, every playstyle is different enough that you can choose whichever one of these feels most interesting to you as well. There's no particular order to this honestly either, each one has their own strengths and weaknesses, but the first one that I want to talk about is simply described as guard poke. The entire point of this playstyle is to remove 95% or more of variables in the fight, or even potential for human error, and just create something that, based on game mechanics, just undeniably outclasses RADAHN. The way that we do this is by putting near all of our actual input into letting us use the biggest, most defensive shield in the game, the Fingerprint Stone Shield. We set it to Sacred Affinity so that it can get full Holy Negation for Phase 2. Once we also have the Scholar's Shield weapon buff applied, we apply Scholar's Shield, as was mentioned, for the boost to our guarding as well, and then we go full in on stamina and endurance boost so that we can block pretty much every combo he has without having stamina problems. On top of that though, we build up a quite strong new weapon, especially for this playstyle, as you do need a thrusting weapon for this to actually have guard poking, as our main attacks will be pressing R1 while holding L1, also known as the guard poke. This is a light attack while you are still blocking, so that you don't even take damage if you attack with this. The only thing that it does is use your stamina and stop you from regenning. With high enough guard stats though, we can essentially just constantly guard and poke, and rarely ever need to take a break for stamina regen outside of maybe between his combos. The playstyle of this is quite simple then, just hold block. If you are above 50% stamina, you can also throw out some pokes. If you're below that, block it until the combo is over without getting too greedy, regen your stamina, and then repeat. The setup itself, well, to really optimize it past what we've already mentioned, these are the stats that you would want, and for talismans, you're looking for a mix of damage increases when possible, but also stamina boosts. You can lean a bit harder towards safety or damage depending on your personal comfort levels with the fight, but when doing it this way, there's very little possibility of error, honestly, as long as you don't get greedy with your pokes when you're not watching your stamina. As for stats, you want 60 vigor for the health, 50 endurance for the second stamina gain soft cap. Past that, you need 48 strength to wield this shield, 12 intelligence for Scholar's Shield as a spell, and then any remaining points you have can either go into arcane for more bleed buildup or strength for more raw damage. And the main way that this just works then is by using the natural bleed buildup of this setup to make occasional pokes strong regardless of how it goes, but then also using bonuses like the White Mask and Lord of Blood's Exaltation talisman to buff all damage that you actually do after getting your bleed as well. Second up then today, it's sort of another bleed build, specifically it's a magic build that uses bleed as a main sort of generator of its actual damage. And this is something that a lot of people have seen going bananas since the release of the DLC in various forms. To begin with, impenetrable thorns. This spell is pretty much just best described as immense magic damage and bleed buildup split between a ton of small thorns that you shoot out in front of you. But for whatever reason, when you actually have an enemy targeted instead of firing it out in a tangled cone of roots, every single thorn will actively hunt your target, and if multiple of these hits, it does an insane amount of both bleed buildup and magic damage, which is part of what makes this so strong. It's just its pure versatility as well. I'll be the first to say that I'm not the most skilled player, and unlike the previous build, this does require dodging to actually make it through. But if you just count the number of casts that actually kill RADAHN from 100% to dead, I think you'll find that this almost feels like it matches his openings. The opportunities to do damage, especially in second phase, are few and far between, and so if every time that you do manage to find an opening you do this much damage, you're bound to kill him sooner rather than later. As far as putting it together then, at level 150, the Maternal Staff is what you want if you want to focus on bleed buildup. Lucette Staff is what you want if you want to focus on magic damage side of things. I would generally lean towards bleed for this specific boss, but for other bosses it might change depending on resistances. If you're above level 150 though, Maternal Staff always is best just because overall you can take better advantage of its high split scaling. On which note, for the stats you want 60 vigor, minimum stats to actually use your gear, including 24 faith for the sorcery, but that means only 1 extra point to get to use Golden Vow, which is quite nice anyways. Then 60 arcane if you are using the maternal staff, both for scaling bleed and just sorcery scaling in general. A couple of points in mind for some bonus FP, some bonus endurance as well, because chain casting this actually costs a fair bit of stamina, more so than FP if you get the opportunity to do so, and the rest of your points just shoved into intelligence for further damage scaling. If you are instead using the Lusat staff version of this for whatever reason, you would instead move the majority of that arcane into your intelligence with the goal of hitting 80. To play it then, simply bide your time, learn to dodge the patterns a little bit, and then whenever there's any sort of opening, punish him with this spell. Use a second one if you can, trade if you have to, your damage is worth it, just don't get it multiple times in return. Not to mention, you can also, instead of what I'm doing with the Staff of the Guilty for the thorn damage bonus, you can instead run a dagger in your offhand using Endure, which will create more openings as long as you're willing to take some damage and trade a little bit. Moving on to our third slot then, this is both a relatively well-known one and one that I've got a slight twist for. It is Bloodfiend's Arm. This thing caught on like wildfire pretty quickly on with the release of the DLC because of its unique heavy attack that just applies a ridiculous amount of blood loss buildup when charged. It used to be 1 charged heavy for a bleed on pretty much anything. There was a nerf to this, but now it still actually is no more than 2 of the same attack for a bleed, and that's on top of hitting some absolutely ridiculous damage numbers by stacking up just a ton of buffs as well, including things like Cragblade as a general weapon buff that increases both your damage and poise damage on already quite heavy attacks. And then we angle this towards the final boss, specifically by sticking on insanely heavy armor using the final talisman slot on Bullgoat Talisman for poise increase, and with that in combination with the white mask, we actually still have enough poise to consistently do our double charged heavy attack combo, even if he hits us a little bit. And before you get concerned about an insane stat requirement to actually use that then, no, this is done at level 150. The trick for this is just using the winged tear in your Wondrous Flask to give you essentially infinite weight load for 3 minutes, which is more than long enough to kill him with this damage and by trading hits using poise. For non-boss fights, my current endurance in my stats here is actually enough to wear this with 3 pieces of Rakshasa armor instead for general damage increase, and then Dragon Crest Great Shield instead of the Bullgoat Talisman, and there you would be at medium equip load, so you'd have normal rolls and stuff, so you don't have to rely on that for the actual just general level clearing. Otherwise, this again just uses normal bleed boosts, white mask, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, but it also gets to use the two-handed talisman for 15% damage boost, and the axe talisman for bonus damage to all charged attacks. The stats then for this are 60 vigor, 28 endurance both for the stamina and for the weight load of Rakshasa when not fighting bosses, 25 faith for Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, and then 45 arcane is the soft cap for bleed buildup on melee weapons, 28 strength requirement for the weapon itself, and my remaining points were just the best split of arcane and strength for pure damage gain on a blood scaling Bloodfiend's Arm. One final thing to mention then, as I might as well while we're here, we have a video on the channel of a setup that lets the Mimic kill the final boss pretty much solo with 0 danger to you as the player really, and that is essentially a mix of you yourself having a big old Scholar Shield Great Shield like the first build, but your Mimic using Bloodfiend's Arm like this third one. And while the Mimic can't be forced to two-handed or do charged attacks, the natural bleed up on this weapon with some arcane is just so extremely high to begin with, and it's just a really hefty damage weapon as well. That just about does it for today then everyone. 3 builds that absolutely destroy RADAHN, the final boss. Even with subpar gameplay, sometimes any of these would get it in less than 5 attempts in the exact setups that I have laid out here. So if you are someone who has just really been struggling, these are precisely what I recommend with these 3 different playstyles: shield poke, magic, or charged colossal weapon smashes, so you can even choose which variety of busted you want to be for this. I hope you've all enjoyed this and hopefully this helps you out if you needed it, or hey, maybe you just enjoyed seeing what these builds can do. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.